Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer1745 here. We're playing Hearts of Iron, of course, invading the Soviet Union. So let's continue this. Conquest. We're still hoping more and more supplies. I tweaked where and how I'm using air power to send in supplies. Wish I had 10 times the aircraft. Yeah, I'm just a little worried about being cut off, so I'm going to retreat to here. Just had organization supplies. I'd be able to deal with this. Okay. Hey, yes. Okay. Air superiority tactics. We're going to let that go. We want air superiority. It's this one that maybe. Oh. Ammo. This will improve a lot of ammo types. A lot of AA and anti-tank gun. Okay. Partisans. This could become a problem. Meaning a pocket. Okay. Alright, let's see. We'll do the flotilla one. I want to do that one. Put it in the production queue, but pop it to the top because it's nearly finished. Oh, and seeing we also have our Little police divisions. Okay. No leaders. Just don't want to lose it even by accident. Let's see where the supplies are flowing. Okay. Those two should help there. Just thinking what's here. Oh, that works. Who do I want to give that to? Let's give it to him. Them there, but we'll stick down. Okay. This is the closest police division. Now here. There we are. That hopefully will help the supply situation. And of course, We're pushing here as soon as I get to the... Wow, look at all those tank brigades. Okay, Ram, yeah, we'll give you some supplies. Actually, no, that might get there the fastest. These guys attack. What are they attacking? Ooh. Good. I want to pin those. Guys just had organization. I could charge and oh well, that's you do. Okay, well, you're gonna support that attack. Uh-oh, that losing organization fast. As soon as you can, you're crossed over there. Yep, they counterattacked. I knew they would, but since I quit in time. No, not a victory province, okay. Okay, we're stopping that attack. Okay, we've won down here. Pushing deeper in. Just where we at. Okay, we're still holding there. No. Alright. Alright, and mountain unit training advanced. We're going to switch that over to command and control. Okay, what's this? Third Panzer Corps upgrade. No, not right at the moment. I don't plan this. At least I don't. I hope this isn't going to be a forever war with the Soviet Union. Okay. Vichy would like some... Okay. Fighters. Fine by me. Oh good, now we have Murmansk again. Monsoon starts to clear. Okay, that's helping us down in Southeast Asia. Oh, mentioning that, just forgot we've got Singapore. We need to get supplies to Singapore. How are we doing all there already? Okay, they have some. supply convoy. Let's go from Athens. Where's Athens? Athena. Singapore. Yeah, I also saw that too. We should create one from here to romance. Just make sure the supplies are flowing there as well. We're building a couple more convoys because we're down sort of low. Let's view there. And let's also set up a resource convoy from Singapore to assets. I think that'll be the lots of resources down there that we could use. Let's see, will this one reach here? Yes, there are supply there. Okay, yes, supplies. Okay, let's see here. Romanian poet Tudor Arganzi, I hope I'm not butchering that too badly, has published a pamphlet titled R.O.N.A. Guess that's also not too much butchered either. Against our ambassador in Bucharest, Manfred Fair von Killinger. Ion Antonescu, the Prime Minister, had ordered the imprisonment of the author and confiscation of all the copies of the newspaper. It was a not a pleasant article, and our lovely ally of Romania is going to do what they can to suppress that, but it does disrupt our relations a little bit because he's quite a popular, well, I don't know, somewhat popular poet. Okay, Legion of French Volunteers against Bolshevism. Yes, and I do believe a lot of the motivation for joining that group was exactly that, anti-Bolshevistic. Okay, Sturm Brigade, R.O.N.A. When a version of this patch was worn by some of the troops in the Channel Islands here, which were British, and that's like the P here is a Cyrillic R, as I understand it, in Russia, and let's see, stands for Russkaya Obryanskaya, whatever, Russian People's Liberation Army. That's the general that was in charge of it, Kaminsky. They interpreted this, the Channel Islanders, of pals of Adolf, is how they, the patch. Now the patch, they also had a, I believe, a sort of St. Andrew, reverse St. Andrew's cross Russian style, Whitefield version, I think, as well. So, over time, the unit, this army got bigger and bigger and bigger. They didn't let it become organized greater than really, I think, divisional size units. And even then, it was sort of somewhat suspect. Not that there weren't theoretically corps or whatever, but they weren't given areas of command, if you will, in that way. I think they were suspect in their dedication, suspect in, were all the troops just going to desert, or if it was, like I say, dedication is a strong counterattack. Would they fight hard or give up? They were mostly armed, at least from the photos I've seen, mostly armed with Russian equipment captured wearing German or versions of the German uniform. Okay, so we will get this 29th Waffen Grenadier Division der SS. I'm not sure the previous, whether it was a Black Ice or, I think it was a Black Ice event, but I'm not sure. Okay, this is sort of my rework of a Black Ice event for TRE, the Russian Schutzkorps Serbian. The tank in the background is from the Prinz Eugen Division, the cavalry, or cavalry or officers were from this group. These, little history. There was the Russian Civil War. I'm sure most all of you know about it. Obviously, well, I could do a series on it. It's a very complicated subject with various factions, but the general white side, the whites, generally speaking, wanted to restore Russia to mostly a Tsarist sort of, or version of the Tsarist glory, though some were a little bit more wanting or willing to have a little bit more of a democratic element to it, but they were pretty authoritarian, pretty Tsarist, even though the Tsarist family was killed at some point. And they weren't willing to even temporarily work with, say, the Ukrainians to, like, with the idea that, well, Ukraine may be able to become independent if they help fight the Bolsheviks or any other groups. It was, they were going to fight everybody who opposed them. Sort of kind of stupid. I understand where they were coming from. They're trying to restore their country. But they made a lot of stupid mistakes. General Wrangel was one of their best generals. He was a Russian, but often was associated with the Cossacks, fighting in this sort of region. Well, and he wasn't in charge through a lot of it, but sort of by a process of elimination, some captures, others just their commands falling apart. He basically ended up in charge of what was left of it after it sort of fell apart, and was fighting for some time in and around here, and then they made the retreat. It's been a few years since I read some books on him. Very good general. Forget, was it here or down more in the Crimea or somewhere, Kuban area? I'm not exactly sure, but somewhere, suffice it to say, in this region, they retreated to a very large number of troops. Maybe 50, 100,000 troops. Don't quote me on that. But it wasn't just 5 or 10,000 troops. It was large numbers, multi-divisional size units. And they were very heavily cavalry formation. And unlike the, particularly the Western Front, but also down in here during World War I, cavalry was useless because they kept having all these cavalry divisions sitting behind the lines because they wanted to, blast their way through with artillery and all the assault troops and get through all the static lines, and then the cavalry would theoretically, through all this moonscape, however that would happen, but pour through it and then charge into the enemy's rear and do, Napoleonic swift movements through there. Never happened, and was never going to happen, because the horse versus the machine gun always won, and it was always better to, use, if you know about the World War I stormtrooper tactics. Well, things were different out in Russia. I sort of defy you in the Russian Civil War era. Build a trench line from here to here and man it, with machine guns, interlocking fields of fire, barbed wire. You know, you just aren't going to cover something that big. It's just impossible. You could pick a city here and put trench works around it, but even that was a bit difficult for the amount of time. So what they did, particularly the whites, but also the reds, they figured out very quickly was cavalry charges against machine guns were a good thing. Not that they did in-depth studies of it, but they sort of tried a bit, you know, low crawl, men, you know, jumping up, running a few yards, jumping, you know, falling down and doing fire and maneuver like that, you know, to get to machine gun position. They were taking a fair number of casualties doing that. And, you know, shooting back at them while they were doing, you know, shooting back with their rifles at the machine guns while they were doing it. They were taking a fair number of casualties. They sort of figured that the horse is fast enough, and these were a lot of open plain, a lot of open areas, that you would actually take less casualties just charging the machine guns. And so, because the horse is just that fast, and they just didn't have the number of machine guns and the density of machine guns in most areas to do it, because you couldn't just go, oh well, here's the front between this province and this province, and obviously it's a lot more tactical, but they could rapidly move, show up and then move around the flanks. So you had to, you know, spread the machine guns everywhere, so they were never that dense, and the amount of barbed wire was, you know, minuscule compared to the, you know, levels on the Western Front. And so that, and the other problem was the whites had continual ammunition shortage. I mean, down to the idea that they either had no ammunition or just 2 or 3 bullets per gun, because they lost a lot of the industrial areas, and so they were entirely dependent for like ammunition on foreign supplies. And for a while they bought ammunition, but they were basically got to the point that they had to rely upon various aid packages to fight the Reds. Churchill, when he was in charge of the Royal Navy, helped during in the sort of immediate post-World War I era, helped there to some degree. So they were, you know, very swift, very sort of blitzkrieg type warfare, but it just was slowly losing out to the grinding of mechanized warfare that the Reds were able to do with railways and bringing down more and more ammunition. So they eventually just were, you know, sort of trapped in a pocket. Well, they all got on about, you know, some of the Russian naval vessels that were still there, a bunch of other ships. About, I think it was like 40 or 50 ships, including some naval vessels that were, semi-functional, shall we say. You know, naval vessels need to be maintained. They weren't well maintained, but they came out, and briefly they were sort of hung up around somewhere in Turkey here, looking for a home, because they were still very well armed. I mean, they didn't have a lot of, like I was saying, a lot of ammunition, but some, and the naval guns still functioned. And this eventually, they found a very willing and friendly home in Yugoslavia, which was a Slavic country, which had a king, liked the idea of the whites, wanted to get a bunch of immigrants that would support the Yugoslav government, because you got to remember, Yugoslavia, as we can now attest, was sort of very much a made-up country. It didn't have a raison d'etre. It didn't have a real reason for being. It was sort of like, hey, you Serbs after killing the Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, since the Austrians were so mean to you, we'll give you this big country sort of to punish the Austrians. Well, totally blew away Wilson's 14 points, or one of them, in that they were supposed to do plebiscites and local determination of, because that was one of his whole things was all this territory here was, Czechs for Czech, you know, and Slovaks, you know, for Slovenia, for Slovakia, Slovenes for Slovenia, all that type of thing was his sort of viewpoint. Well, Yugoslavia was basically a Serb state to, you know, and a lot of things as sort of a reward for and a punishment for Austria and a reward for them. It was part of the French idea, I think, of creating a southern buffer to Germany and whatnot as well. So, like I was saying, a lot of these White Russians came to Yugoslavia. Now, also a lot of them post that later immigrated to France, and they mostly stayed quiet through World War II and just kept their heads down. They weren't pro-German. They definitely weren't pro-Nazi, the ones in France. But they obviously hated the Soviets and were not friendly to a lot of the leftists in France. But they didn't want to cause trouble because they believed France was going to be, you know, a country again at some point, and they were going to be, they and their children were going to be living in it, so they weren't trying to become traitors to it. Yugoslavia was very much of a different situation. These Russians, now most of the soldiers now, some of these officers may have been a bit older, and you can see some of the pictures of them. They have white Russian medals. Now these are the officers that were probably, you know, young officers, few old dudes, but mostly young officers in World War I that are now, you know, mature middle-aged men that were coming back to being officers for this Russian group here. And they, but most of the foot soldiers were born to these Russian families, and when they came out, they brought out a lot of women with them. Still, it was mostly a male thing, and I'm sure they intermarried to the local population. I don't know if it was particularly married to Serbians or just simply married to various locals, and I don't know that they were in any particular specific locality. I think they were sort of settled all over Yugoslavia. So once the war with the Soviet Union got going, they wanted to form a white Russian army to go in and fight there. Now, the Germans didn't want this to happen. They were very much against this idea. As you see in the previous event there, talked about various turncoat Russians that were joining the German forces. That wasn't really in the German plan either. That came out more out of necessity. I think these guys, they had multiple worries about them. One, I think they worried about their quality, if you will, of command, because there were a lot of them. They were not necessarily specifically in a command group sense, but there were a lot of officers. A lot of officers came out of the woodwork, put on uniforms, not necessarily that they ever got any commands, you know, but you know, they all saw themselves as the next great generals, I'm sure. But I think the Germans thought that they were, you know, a war more out of date in their military training and tactics and all of that. So they had concerns there. I think they also had concerns that these guys are the whites and it didn't fit in with their propaganda in Russia, and if you were looking to be establishing maybe a new white terror or a new something else, it might have a negative reaction to the to what's going on, because particularly like in the early stages, the Baltic states and some of the Ukrainian units, they were sort of joining up on the premise of you know, some sort of national liberation or some sort of readjustment. You know, if not liberated from the German situation, better deal under the Germans than they're getting under the Stalin, if you will. If you start putting in these whites that want to restore Tsarist Russia, it might cause conflict there. And also with the Russians that were more and more, first unofficially, but more and more fighting there, they weren't necessarily, to my understanding, because, you know, you got to realize this is 1941 and later, so most of your 30 and youngers don't remember the Tsar. You know, they might have been 5 or 10 years old or something when the Russian Revolution happened. But as that young of a child, you don't have, you know, clear memories. You may have memories of the chaos, but you don't probably have memories of what it was like before. So they weren't necessarily fighting to restore the old whites. They were fighting to get rid of Stalin and the evils of the communist regime. Introducing these guys might conflict the message. But the Germans also weren't stupid. They saw this as a useful manpower group. And there were moderate amount of fairly early, oh yeah, we're gonna, you know, get you guys form your units, we'll get you to the to go fight the Bolsheviks as soon as you can, but with no real, to my understanding, no real intention of ever having that happen. What they became was a moderately effective anti-partisan units in Yugoslavia. And so, a bunch of events, yes. So I've, you can see the commander, I did a bunch of research. I got the officers as close as I could. All the officers you see here are real officers. Some of them are commanding different units or whatever, because I couldn't find both the name of the commander and a good photo of them. So you have this core of, you know, one good sort of mobile, because they did have a Cossack cavalry unit, one sort of good infantry unit, and the rest are just basically partisans. So you can use them in Yugoslavia to keep your troubles down, or you can of course send them, because obviously the the local revolt risk doesn't know the difference, but you know, you can use them in the east, because most of them are set up with a military police establishment. But if you, well, old guard, as you can see, I think they're mostly old guard, because a lot of them there. I didn't know if I gave any of them, well, mountain warfare, and a couple of them are winter specialists. But you'll notice they don't have the trait of being a German officer. So if you see them prior to this event happening, because they will come available beforehand, you might want to not use them. Now you can see, like, he's in a German uniform. Sometimes, and it shifted a bit, sometimes that they wore more German uniform styles, and some of their styles of uniforms were very much Russian. But they were all post Tsarist period stuff. So that's sort of the interesting group. So they fought, and as the thing said, they estimated about 17,000 went through the ranks of the units. Here, this is a little over strength, obviously, because some of these units are bumped up much higher than they should be. But they weren't 17,000 at any one time. They were probably like around 5,000 or 6,000, probably. But with, you know, various brigades, and I wanted to be able to have you to spread them around Yugoslavia. And but they had about 10,000 casualties during the war, so they fought hard against the partisans. They weren't just like some of your local Serbian troops that were raised to fight against the partisans that basically just guarded places. Were glorified local guards, guard this bridge, a platoon of guys or whatever, against a, railway bridge against a partisan attack or something. These guys really did fight the partisan war, and they really did hate the Bolsheviks, the communist partisans in Yugoslavia, not because they were Serbians or anything, just because they were communists. Okay, yeah, we'll expand the air base. Okay. Jagdflieger Schule 7, formed in 1942 in Nancy, SA. That's somewhere, I believe, around here in this part of the world. Let's see, money cost, fuel cost. One thing we don't really have is fuel, but okay. And supplies, where are my supplies? Steiner. Officers, we'll gain some more officers. Cool, we can use those. How are we doing for officers? 103%. Yep, that's good. Cool. German reinforcement. Yes, we will do so. Air landing and flak division. Okay, well, cool. Not sure where we'll use them. Again, for those few hundred downloads of the Let's Play version, so I edited out the requirements that the British were still fighting in North Africa, just because if you're playing the Let's Play version and you're going to do this with Tanganyika, you still want the Africa Corps. It's just not going to be units fighting in North Africa, fighting there. So we'll see about that, but that's cool. Alright. And Army Group HQs have advanced. Yay, yay, yay. Okay, so that now we're all out of doing that. Now we're in November 42, so we're getting close to starting the later research. So, not that it matters right now because we are out of supplies, but reduces time between attacks by 16. Well, not that we're out of supplies, we just don't have the supplies where we need them. But it helps our command groups, that's good. Okay, I think this is a good spot to end this episode at. Thank you for viewing. Thanks for watching. Really do appreciate that. Also, thanks for liking the videos. Please post comments. Love to hear your thoughts on either what I'm talking about or how well I'm playing. See you next time.